Verse 10, the NIV says, what does it say? For some say, his letters are weighty and forceful, but in person he is unimpressive, and his speaking amounts to nothing. Paul's not in the habit of explaining himself for anything, for everything rather, but because this deals with saving a portion of his flock, he is going to explain himself. Explaining yourself often is subjectivity, is hypersensitivity, it's arrogance. You don't have to explain yourself for everything. But because Paul has such a great responsibility due to the authority of his apostleship, he does have to explain himself, especially when it comes to saving a portion of his flock. And it was worth it, as we saw in chapter 7 and chapter 8, how a lot of these Corinthians recovered, even to the point that they are prepared, already arriving at gate 5 of the divine power sphere. Spiritual self-esteem. So he's about to take some of the comments, as he did over here. I, Paul, who is a mouse in person, but a giant away, speaking through letters. He continues getting this, using their arguments. He's going to be a little bit sarcastic now up ahead and explain the mutual admiration society of some of these Judaizers and those Corinthians who follow them. They have no standing as to why they act so great, so respectable, adhering to Jewish celebrityship, when in reality, their validation is brought about by comparing themselves to themselves and eulogizing and flattering themselves. But let's begin. Verse 10, it says, now we have here the explanatory of hoti. We're going to translate this for. And then for, we have high epistolae men facing. Let's jump over here to the verb for. Why does he jump to the verb? What does he say? Why does he explain this back here? Because he's about to explain the argument. What are they saying? He explains the reason why he needs to rub in his authority towards them. And now he's going to use the skeptic argument, or those comments that they're saying. So we have the present active indicative of phemi. And this is to say as in a dialogue. They say to each other. Present tense is descriptive for something that's occurring at the moment. The active voice, they. But it's in the singular, obviously, representing the skeptic. That's the active voice, is the Judaizers and those negative Corinthians who are duped by these Judaizers. And the indicative mood is for the reality as to about what they say. For they say, and then we have here men plus they. This is classical Greek. On the one hand, on the other hand. The NIV does not like to translate this on the one hand, on the other hand. I do. I want to see you being able to understand these things. I like on the one hand, on the other hand, it makes it easy for me to speak, even though nowadays you'll be made fun of if you speak that way. The other day I got made fun of for using therefore as a adverbial conjunction. It's a wonderful conjunction, but all right. To each his own. Okay. Men, they. So, on the one hand, on the other hand. They're about to give a contrast as to, and as in his letters, wow, he's very powerful, but in person he's something else. So, on the one hand, high epistolae. This is the nominative plural feminine of epistolae once again. And these are letters, from which we get the word epistle. On the one hand, the letters. And so this article here points to his letters. We can translate it as a possessive. Not just the letters, but his letters. It's obviously a feminine. And it's a nominative. We have a predicate nominative here, but without the verb, esti, ami. It's an ellipsis, so it's very strong. On the one hand, his letters are, so we have the third person the present active indicative third person singular of Amy, estin, somewhere right there because it's an ellipsis, no verb. On the one hand, his letters, barus, kai, iskurai. So, weighty, severe, heavy. I like to translate it heavy because they are substantial. They are impressive and they are authoritative. The words come full with content. This is not like a lot of those great Greek writings of ancient Greek where, wow, the jumping around and so nice and so beautiful, but the content was missing. Oh yes, there was content, just one meaning. It's not like the Word of God where there's packed of wisdom in one sentence, two sentences, and one word. So yes, his writings are heavy, but here's heavy in terms of impressive, authoritative. This is the predicate nominative. The subject nominative is hai epistolae. You might ask yourself, if both of them are nominative in that predicate nominative construction, how can you tell which one is the subject nominative and which one is the predicate nominative? Well, the subject nominative is often distinguished or detected by the word that has the article. Okay. On the one hand, his epistles are heavy. And, so, connective kai, and iskurai. Iskuros means, yes, strong, powerful, having endowed power. Because his words came with special impact. That's one of the things that God adds to his authority, is that your words will have a special impact. So, his words, his epistles are heavy and powerful. For, they say, on the one hand, his epistles are heavy and powerful. Now, they, on the other hand, post-positive they, on the other hand, a parousia. Look, we're about to see what they're emphasizing. You can see their norms and standards. You could see their false scales of values. You could see the false priorities. The reason why Paul says, y'all keep seeing things according to superficial appearance. Yes, it is true that Paul's appearance was not that impressive. And there's implication that he was probably short, and he had a big stomach, and he had a squeaky voice, high-pitched squeaky voice. My voice is not impressive. I come from a family of raspy voices, both on my mother's side and my father's. And so that's the reason why I have this voice, but deal with it. So, parousia. Hey, parousia. And this means presence. But, presence. And then the article, so this is the nominative. We have another predicate nominative construction. Hey, parousia. And then, so this is the subject nominative with the article. The predicate nominative over here is weak. Let's continue here. So, hey parousia, but his presence. The article is translated as possessive. His presence. And then we have the descriptive genitive of soma, body. Literally, but the presence of his body. The article here we translated possessive. Not this one, but this one we translated possessive. The presence of his body. They're focusing on the physical presence, on the body. Who cares what your pastor looks like? If he's short, if he's tall, if he's lanky, if he's big, if he walks a certain way, if he sits down with a certain way with a crooked stance. There was once a pastor who had scoliosis and he used to sit down crookedly, and the congregation was saying he's arrogant. Why is he arrogant? Because the way he sits down. Just so you can get the idea as to what we emphasize. Yes, the pastor was wrong about many other things, but he was definitely right about sitting crookedly because of his scoliosis, and the congregation was wrong. We're going to translate it literally as the presence of his body, but his physical presence. But his physical presence And now we add, there's an ellipsis here, so we add the present active indicative third person singular of Amy. So estin. His physical presence is asthenes. It's the nominative singular feminine of asthenes. It's an adjective. Is weak. So going against iskuros. Powerful. They say on the other hand, no, he is weak. His physical presence is weak. Okay? But his physical presence is weak. And kai, connective kai. Ho logos. And logos means many times doctrine, a matter, an utterance, speech. And that's how we're going to use it here. His speech, his rhetoric, his speaking ability. We are talking about in-person presence. These Corinthians are no longer the Greeks before the destruction of Corinth. A lot of these guys are descendants of those new Romans, those new colonizers. However, Rome did acquire Greek culture when they invaded Greece. Their culture became Greek. So we expect that they're still very snobby about Greek culture and the great rhetoric of the 5th century BC, and these great playwrights and philosophers like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. Great writings such as Gorgias, except he was not a Greek from Greece. He lived in Syracuse, Sicily, and still he was a Greek type. And so yes, most likely these guys are pretentious about their Greek culture. His speech rhetoric, his speaking ability, and then, so this is the subject nominative. How do we know? Because of the article. And we have an ellipsis once again in this predicate nominative construction, the present active indicative of Amy, estin, his speech, and then the predicate nominative of this participle here, the perfect passive participle of exutheneo. Exutheneo. It's a compound word. It's a participle too. This compound word is composed of ek, plus uthen or uden, but it's made into a verb. Udeneo or utheneo. Uden or uthen means nothing. It's the negative u plus one, hen. So not one means nothing. You make it into a verb, nothing, making nothing. But with the preposition ek, it means to nothing out or to make nothing. To make nothing. Therefore, it's often translated as reject, to despise, to treat with contempt, to make nothing out of something. Or here, I like the NIV, amounts to nothing. So this is the opposite of his words, his letters being weighty, heavy, impressive. And this might be true. It might be true that Paul as a writer was much better writer than a rhetorician, than a public speaker. It is difficult to find a person who's an academic who speaks just as well as he writes. For when you write, you take your time, you look up words, synonyms, so that you do not sound so repetitive. But when you're speaking, you're out there speaking extemporaneously, impromptu. So it naturally follows that many people are much better at writing than speaking. It applies to me. As you can see, I'm not much of a speaker, but you're here under me because God put me here and put you here. So deal with it once again. But yes, it might be true that his speaking was not as impressive as his words, but his speaking was still heavy in the sense that it had the word of God. Principle: your pastor might not speak very eloquently, speaking with great multiloquence. He might not speak as your previous pastor or as your teachers or your professors. Let's add to it, he might have a squeaky voice. I used to have a pastor he yelled for everything. He probably felt like he lacked content, so he needed to make up with yelling. And he had a high-pitched voice. And you could tell a lot of the congregation, it was a nuisance to them. But there they were as well. The content is what matters. Paul did have content in his Word of God, in his speaking. And as he spoke, he communicated very basic. My pastor, after the 1986, he had to communicate very basic because a lot of the congregation was not ready for the next advanced Bible doctrine. And so he had to enumerate his points, very basic points, speaking very slow, just to give you the idea as to the capacity of his congregation. It must have been frustrating for him as a pastor to have such advanced doctrine, yet not being able to go over those things with his congregation as you desire, having to go back and speak slowly, very basic.